All right. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you for being here today. My name is Megan Walsh. I'm the program manager at Capital Heritage Connection. And I'd like to start us off today with land acknowledgement. So I want to acknowledge that the land from which we are broadcasting from today is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. Please feel free to share with us in the chat which territory you're joining us from today. We extend our respect to the many Indigenous connections, past, present, and future, from First Nation to Métis and Inuit peoples who are on this territory. We also wish to acknowledge that the digital space in which we are assembled is often inaccessible to Indigenous peoples, and to support improved access, we'll be recording this session and sharing it as a resource on our web pages. So, to get started, here's just a little agenda for the next hour or so that we'll be spending together. I'm just going to go through a couple of housekeeping issues, talk very quickly about Capital Heritage Connection, and then we'll get into our session today. So for the housekeeping, please keep yourself muted while our wonderful presenters are talking. Questions will come at the end, but feel free to pop them in the chat. You know, if they pop into your head and you want to get them down in case you forget them throughout the session, you can pop them in the chat and we'll come back to them during the question period. We do have the transcriptions enabled, so you should be able to turn them on at the bottom of your screen. There's a little icon that has CC in a little like rounded box. If you have any technical issues, you could message me in the chat, or if you get shot out of Zoom for some reason, you can email me at program@capitalheritage.ca. We are recording this session, as I mentioned, so if you don't want to be on screen, feel free to turn off your camera and to type any questions in the chat box. So just very quickly, as I said, about CHC, for those of you who this is your first time engaging with us and joining us for a session. So Capital Heritage Connection, we are an umbrella organization here in the National Capital Region. And our mission is to connect, promote, and strengthen the capital area's heritage and history communities by creating opportunities for collaboration and development, as well as providing cultural leadership. So we do have a membership, which you are all invited and encouraged to join. We do have a free membership option for those of you who would like to take advantage of that. And you can take advantage of our workshops, our professional development. We run a mentorship program, which will be starting soon for students and emerging professionals, where we pair mentees with experienced professionals in the National Capital Region, as well as outside the region this year, to give you a boost to your career and to help you kind of on your career journey in the heritage sector. So as I said, we have our membership. So we currently have around 140 members, and it consists of individuals, students, organizations. We have some business members as well that we partner with for different events. One of our biggest partners, of course, is the City of Ottawa. So we do run, we co-run Heritage Day with them in February. So we invite you all to participate in that as well. And if you subscribe to our newsletter, you'll get all of the information about Heritage Day and anything else that is going on in the sector. So without further ado, I am going to pass it off to our presenters today. I'll let them introduce themselves. So we have Natalie and Danuta here who are going to be talking to us about web accessibility. And I'm just going to switch my screen so that I can share their presentation for them. But Natalie and Danuta, you can take it away.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here today. And thanks to Megan and Capital Heritage Connection for inviting Natalie and I to come speak to you all about web accessibility. So I guess just to start off, we'll just be going over some very basic elements of web accessibility to get you started, and like how to make content on your websites or microsites or online exhibitions that you might be doing as part of your heritage work more accessible to a wider audience. This will cover like text, images, audio, video, and things like that. And we will not be covering any kind of like development, things that are really get into code or social media in this workshop. We'll really only be focusing on website materials. So I will pass it to Natalie to introduce herself, and then I'll introduce myself again.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Danuta. Just a quick, I guess, tech thing. Is everyone able to see the title on the first slide? I'm not seeing it on my end, and I just want to make sure we're all good to go
either.
We dive in. Megan, are you sharing from your browser or a downloaded version?
I'm sharing from the browser, but I can share from the downloaded one.
Okay, yeah, I'm just wondering if
better. Let me just do that right now. Let me just stop. Sorry, everyone. Apologies. Oh, it came up when I clicked on it. Technology. Okay. Let's try this again. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, there we go. Obviously, I need this workshop as much as everybody else. All right, take it away.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. So we'll just go to the next slide now, and we'll do a bit of an introduction. So in terms of myself, hi everyone. My name is Natalie Hart. I am a white woman living with 2 chronic invisible disabilities. I identify with the label politically disabled, which is a term used by scholar Mia Mingus to kind of mean someone who has a lived experience of being disabled, but also who has an analysis about ableism and how it connects to power and privilege. So this part of my identity does affect my work and how I am in the world. It allows me to perceive barriers that others may not be aware of, and also work to prevent similar barriers and remove those barriers as well. And I'm really happy to be presenting with Danuta today.
And yeah, I'm Danuta, and I work a lot in web spheres. And like I mentioned in the chat, I'm calling in from Kingston, so I'm not in Ottawa, but was born and raised in Ottawa. And I also, in 2018, I sustained a minor traumatic brain injury, otherwise known as a concussion, which has had lingering symptoms that has continued to have an impact on my work and life. So sometimes I'm not able to sit on screens, especially without my blue filter glasses, and things like that. So I would kind of start to identify with the term acquired neurodivergence, which refers to a neurological difference that can develop as part of a health condition or an injury. I'm otherwise very much learning as I go about accessibility, and also unlearning things about accessibility. And through my work, I'm trying to make online experiences as accessible as possible. So what I share today is a lot of things that I've learned, mostly by making a lot of mistakes. And so, yeah, this is an ongoing conversation and things that will have to kind of keep coming up as you go through accessibility work. So we'll just go to our next slide, I guess.
So in terms of some of the terms we'll be using throughout today, they are listed on the slide. So social model of disability, accessibility, inclusion, and digital. So in terms of the first term, social model of disability, this isn't something that we'll necessarily explicitly say again during the presentation. However, it is kind of a framing for the presentation today that we will very much be using. So in terms of a definition for this term, the social model of disability defines disability as the social barriers imposed on people with impairments, so things like mental, cognitive, or physical differences that disable them from participation in society. So if you are familiar with the medical model of disability, for example, this is really contrasting with that in terms of how it frames and looks at disability as something that society contributes to versus the disability being inherent in the person and something that they have to fix or heal, for example. The next term we'll be using quite a lot through the presentation is accessibility. So this is the practice of making content, projects, devices, and environments barrier-free to a wide range of users regardless of abilities.
And then the next two terms are inclusion and digital. And again, inclusion is something that we're going to be kind of like implying throughout the rest of the workshop as well. So here we've defined it as kind of like an aim to embrace all people irrespective of race, gender, disability, medical, or other needs. And it's about giving equal access and opportunities and getting rid of discrimination and intolerance and removing barriers so that people can participate in all aspects of public life. And kind of related to this, and I'll mention, is inclusive design, which is about making places that everyone can use. So the internet itself is also a place in a way. And so we need to be able to design spaces on the internet that are also barrier-free, which in terms of digital, this can encompass a number of things, including digital technologies, so like computer-based products that help people to communicate, learn, or work, and to also share data and other information, or digital tools like using computer-based products to create, digitize, and publish digital content, which is very applicable to a museum industry. And so that can also include like graphics, video, audio, and other things that you might publish through your websites, including other kinds of media. And so we'll just go to our next slide. So what is digital accessibility and why does it matter? So there's a few key things that we wanted to just kind of go over. You may be familiar with some of these already, but in terms of legislation, there is legislation out there that says that things must become accessible by January 1st, 2025, and that's the AODA, or otherwise known as the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disability Act, which is a piece of Ontario legislation, which we'll refer to because we're all in Ontario, I think. And this outlines a few things about making sure that that the purpose of this act is to recognize the history of discrimination against persons with disabilities in Ontario, and to make sure that the development and implementation of services enforces accessibility standards in order to achieve accessibility for everyone who has a disability, and to make sure that things are accessible again by 2025. And so with regards to web standards, it's the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the main kind of international body that sets the standards for the development of the web, basically. And so they also have developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or otherwise known as WCAG. I don't know how to pronounce that acronym otherwise. And these are basically a number of guidelines that set out criteria for making websites accessible. So this also kind of goes into code, and it also applies to content and other things that you might be adding in on your website. And these are also serving as legal requirements. So again, the AODA references these standards. The WCAG also falls into 3 levels. So there's an A, which is like very basic meeting of accessibility criteria, and then AA, which is the kind of medium aspect, which is the base legal requirement for most websites. And then AAA is the highest level of accessibility, and these are usually, this level is usually reserved for like very specialist kind of websites for accessibility. But for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, these criteria are also kind of organized into 4 different groups. So perceivable, the information and user interface components must be presentable to users in ways that they can perceive. This means that users must be able to perceive the information being presented, and it cannot be invisible to any of their senses. And it has to be operable. So the user interface components and navigation must be operable. This means that users must be able to operate the interface, and that the interface cannot require interaction that a user cannot perform. And understandable information and the operation of user interfaces must be understandable. So this means that users must be able to understand the information as well as the operation of the user interface. The content or operation cannot be beyond their understanding. And robust. So the content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of users, including assistive technologies. So this means that the user must be able to access the content as technologies advance and as technologies and users evolve. So the content should remain accessible as different things kind of might happen. And if any of these are not true, users with disabilities are unable to use the web. So this is why digital accessibility matters. And so we'll go to our next slide. And in the context of, I guess, why Natalie and I were asked to do this webinar, is that we have been working with the group of Ontario Emerging Museum Professionals Committee, or GoEMP, on redesigning their website. And we've been flagging a number of accessibility things that should kind of be taken into account as the committee redesigns their website. And so we were asked to make a checklist so that they could use going forwards to make content on their website more accessible. And this included page structure and design, content, use of video and audio, images, attachments, and hyperlinks. However, I will note that there are limitations of checklists and these guidelines as well, and that this does not actually replace input from people who have disabilities and lived experience of navigating the internet with a disability. These are guidelines that should at minimum be put in place and are required by AODA. But you should also be looking for insights from people in your communities and about how accessible and usable your websites actually are. There are also a number of tools out there that can help you assess your accessibility criteria success, but these are also these automated tools sometimes can only find some of the issues. And so that's where somebody with lived experience is actually, you know, the best person to ask because the tools are fallible. So we'll just go to our next slide. So I'll quickly talk about page structure. So when you're looking at structuring a new page on your website, like you might be using Drupal or WordPress, there's usually like that section where you can add in a new page. What is going on in the background of that is usually like a semantically hierarchical relationship between different aspects of HTML. And so when you enter your page title, that's where you have like your title tag, as it were, in HTML, and then everything else kind of nests with underneath that in a page hierarchy. So this is also you might be formatting Word documents in a similar way. And so this is kind of the same approach that a web page should follow. So something like a screen reader can also skim ahead to catch all of your headings, for example, to be like, oh, okay, I'd rather skip this section, I'd rather go to this section, that sort of thing. The screen readers recognize the headings, and the heading text can't just be body text, that sort of thing. So there's, it should be from level of importance downwards, essentially. And then, so if you have like a more important secondary heading, you might want to use an H1 heading, and then H2, H3, and then those are kind of like nested within a page. And if you're not using something like WordPress or Drupal and are using something like Squarespace or Wix as a website, sometimes in their themes, they sneakily use these headings as kind of aesthetic ways to emphasize text. And this is really confusing for people using screen readers. So just make sure that you're using the appropriate heading and that it doesn't, it does make sense for somebody using a screen reader. And there's lots of screen readers out there that you can test this with as well. Next slide, please. So if you are using WordPress or Drupal, you can find these things here. So I've highlighted in a red box the paragraph style. So a drop down, you can't click on it, but thanks, Megan, for outlining that with the mouse. So this is the WordPress classic editor. And then you can find the appropriate styling there. The text tab in the editor, so in the right-hand corner, if you're familiar with HTML, you can actually format it by switching the view to look at the actual code and the way that the text is expressed, so you can change things there as well. Next slide. And if you're using a newer version of WordPress, so Gutenberg, they've changed things a little bit, and the editor is much more visual and more modular, so you can drag and drop things around. So if you're adding in a new module, it'll give you options for a paragraph, a heading, or a quote, or a few other options there. And so you can look at how things are and format them correctly. There, next slide. And then if you click on the three dots in the right-hand corner, you can also get the editor view for the code version as well in WordPress, just in case you need to do that. And then next slide. If you're in Drupal, same thing. Styles, and then you can also look at the source code. So you've got lots of options to make sure that you're formatting your page structure correctly. All right, next slide. And then for themes, same kind of considerations. You want to make sure that like you're choosing, like if you're choosing kind of like an out-of-the-box WordPress theme, there are lots of them that are accessible ready. So this is a conversation that Natalie and I had with GoEMP especially, to make sure that the theme that was being used was already designed with accessibility in mind. So it was using the right kinds of colors, it had the right kind of heading structure, already kind of baked into the design. So if you're doing a custom WordPress or Drupal site or any kind of new website, you want to make sure that your theme is designed with accessibility in mind right from the get-go, because it's really difficult to start to revise these things after the fact. And again, appropriate headings and page structure. If you're making your content layouts, you want to make sure that your content is grouped together in a way that is clear, and also makes sense, and that something that, you know, is not related to something that you're talking about isn't like right next to it, because then it's going to be very confusing just in terms of like the layout and the way that the content is designed. You also want to make sure that you have sufficient color contrast so that people with either low vision or color blindness can see and read your text. And there's also tools that you can use to double check your color contrasts, and we'll have an example in just a few minutes. And then similarly, like if you're using a form or any other kind of design consideration that uses color to convey an information, you want to make sure that that information is also conveyed in a different way as well. So like if you have a form and you're using red to denote a required field, you should also be kind of maybe including an asterisk, being like all fields are marked in red and with an asterisk to make sure that this is a required field. And finally, again, kind of related to themes and content structure, is page layouts are mobile responsive. This is often something that I haven't seen in a little while for museum websites, but occasionally I run across one that still is like pretty basic in terms of its HTML and CSS, and it's not mobile responsive. So what that means is you'll see the desktop version on your smartphone or on your phone, and what mobile responsive websites can do is like they help to simplify the design and also to make it easier for people to use on a phone. So you're not looking at like really, like you don't have to like zoom in on your phone to click on a button or to like go through a navigation menu or something like that. Like it's very, like it's just designed specifically for that device. So it's much easier to use. And then this also simplifies the design for desktop. So that's part of accessibility, but it's something to consider anyway. Next. Oh yeah. So this is just an example of the color contrast. So if you're doing text on a color, like as part of your design, you want to make sure that it has sufficient contrast. And these are just some examples of, you know, things that I have personally seen people use in design, either on the web or in print, that just is hard to read. So like neon colors on top of each other, really hard to read. Those colors are vibrating at certain frequencies that kind of like cancel each other out almost. And it rates at a 2.5 to 1. where AA needs at least a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 to pass that criteria. And similarly, what my mother who's a graphic designer, calls banana text, like yellow and white, is also very hard to read. And if you made that grayscale, which is a great way to check color contrast to see if it's still legible, it disappears pretty much. And it has the lowest rating out of all these examples. And then finally, the blue and white example has the highest contrast rating, and it's it's good. It passes both the AA and the AAA ratings. So there are tools. We have a list of them at the end that you can use to check these things. So next slide.
Right. So in terms of content, this is very much related to page layout and design, as well as page structure. So when you are creating a page on your website, you'll want to consider content, page layout, and design together. So in terms of some tips for making your content more readable, more accessible, the first is very much related to some of the items that Danuta was discussing. So you'll want to use punctuation to emphasize any text versus using bold, italic, strike through, or even color, because that's not something that a screen reader is going to pick up, for example. And so you want to make, if you're wanted to emphasize a text, you want to make that able to be perceived by everyone. The next item is left aligned text. So generally we are going to read from left to right on a screen. And that's also how a screen reader is going to convey that text to the user. So it's just more readable in general to format the text on the left. In terms of fonts, generally you'll want to use a sans serif font on any kind of digital. So on your website, for example, you want to use a sans serif font. That's just a little bit more readable on a screen versus if you have something in print. Serif font is going to be generally more readable in that context. In terms of inclusive language, you'll want to consider current standards and just generally respectful language. If you're, for example, referencing people with disabilities, and steer away from kind of outdated terms and things like that. In terms of plain language and readability, generally you'll want to aim for a grade 10 level or less. So this means in terms of sentence structure and vocabulary, you'll want to avoid the use of passive voice, complicated jargon, unless you're explicitly explaining that in the text. And then as well, you want to format in shorter sentences, so about 20 words or less. There are certain readability apps and things like that out there that you can use to test, to get a gauge of what your kind of readability score is. So again, if it's higher than grade 10, then you want to make some modifications to kind of lower that score a little bit. So there is one app that I've used called the Hemingway app. So again, that can give you a sense of what the readability is, but you'll also want to obviously read it over yourself and have someone else perhaps proofread, just to ensure that you know, there's not too much complicated jargon and things that are hard to understand in that text. So on the next slide, and just one more slide. So this is purposefully formatted to be not readable. And so if you'd like, in the chat, to identify some of the things that are maybe quote unquote wrong about how this text is formatted. So just as context, this is an excerpt from the Accessible Canada Act. So this is federal legislation around accessibility. And so there are certain kind of mistakes that I've kind of made in this slide. And if you'd like, you can just kind of type out maybe what some of those are in the text. So I'm seeing it's aligned to the center. That's great. So again, for readability, you'll want to align it to the left. Absolutely, that's a great example. Anything else? So as well, there are headings. Yeah, there's color being used to denote emphasis in certain areas. So for the links, absolutely. And then as well, there's text that's not linked, but that is underlined and in bold. So again, we'll want to use a different method to emphasize that text. The other thing is that it's using a serif font on a screen. So again, a sans serif is going to be generally more readable. And then as well, if I can even read this, because I honestly, I can't even read it on my screen. It's using quite a lot of complicated legal jargon. Now, if your audience are lawyers, then that is maybe fine. But if you're, wanting your website to be for the general public and for them to get that information, then some of that needs to be either explained or written in plain language. So on the next 2 slides, font is pretty small too, absolutely. So just one other slide. So this is actually the plain language summary from the Accessible Canada Act. So again, if your audience is, perhaps general public, not familiar with legal jargon, this is maybe a better option so that information is more understandable in general for that audience. As well, we see a lot of the elements that we identified previously in the chat are corrected. So left aligned, sans serif font, larger font as well. And then just aligned to the left. I'm not sure if I said that one already. But yeah, so those are just some tips for content. The next slide, we'll move on to audio and video. So in terms of some things you can do to ensure your audio and video content is more accessible are providing transcripts and closed captions as well. So one thing we will say is that these are the bare minimum to provide for this type of content. So you'll really want to make sure that these are things that you are achieving to ensure that your accessibility level is reaching that kind of bare minimum. As an example, if a deaf person who exclusively uses sign language, and so they don't read written English, for example, if they're trying to access your content and there's just captions and a transcript, they're not going to be able to access that content. So just something to keep in mind. In terms of transcripts, there are platforms that allow you to kind of automatically generate those captions and transcripts, like Otter AI, I know is one. Just a little, I guess, disclaimer about some of those platforms is that they don't always structure the transcript or captions in a readable way. There are also often errors, often with like people's names and things like that, if you have the option to go in first and you have a list of presenters or something like that, you can go in first and input those names or input certain words that will be used throughout a presentation that the transcript generator might not catch. That's something good to do, and then also correcting that formatting after the fact as well, and any errors as well. In terms of some tips for formatting your transcript, you'll want to include things like who is speaking at any given moment, timestamps. This is especially important for if, for example, you're using the transcript to generate captions after. As well, you'll want to include descriptions of non-speech audio if that's important to understanding what's going on in the audio or the video content. And then as well, just in general, putting information into logical paragraph lists and sections just to make it easier to read. The next part we'll talk about is on captions. So in general, closed captions are, I would say, probably preferred just because those allow users to customize them versus open captions, which are not customizable and are kind of already baked in to the video content. So in the next slide, we have a screenshot of the studio portion, the studio area of YouTube. It's kind of like the back end when you're uploading a video. So there is the option in YouTube to upload a transcript, and then the platform will kind of do its best guess at formatting that into captions. So that is a lot of the work done for you. However, if you're using this method, I would suggest definitely going back in and formatting the captions so that they are, into more readable chunks, as well as adjusting kind of the timing in there as well. So I think our next slide is about images.
Myself off mute for a second. Yeah, so images are a big part of websites and are especially important when we're communicating about cultural heritage online. So if you're adding in an image to a web page, all images should have alt text or alternative text associated with them so that they can be accessible to screen readers to access that information contained in the image. And so what is alt text necessarily? Just a quick definition is a visual description that provides a general sense of the content of an image, and it is structured as a sentence fragment, or it could be a little bit longer in the case of a longer description, that indicates the most important content of the image. It is approximate, for most alt text, let's just say, you should be able to convey the importance of the image in a short sentence. If you have space for a longer description, because sometimes some screen readers have a limit of 125 characters in your alt text, but if you do have room, or if you have another opportunity to describe the image nearby to the image, remember content associations, you could provide a more detailed and extensive description of the image. and can also be thought of as like the analog version of the cited user's lightbox view of an image, as it can, and these can be anywhere between like a couple sentences to a whole paragraph or so, to contribute to the accessibility of the image. And it could also like go into like the feeling that is expressed through the image, the kinds of like if it was like a scene of like fall, like what is the, like how do you feel when you look at it, and like how would you describe that to somebody who couldn't access that information. But most important with alt text is that it should be related to the context of the image and its intended message. So depending on how you're using the image, it might actually be different. Let's say like you were using that image of fall in like a promotional context versus kind of like an educational context about trees or something like that. Like it's very different, the kinds of things that you might include in that kind of alt text. You may not want to include image of or photo of, because it's already like the HTML is already coded in such a way where it's like image. And then you'll just repeat that basically when the screen reader passes over that part of the content, unless it is something that is actually relevant to the description of the image. So like if you were looking at like a daguerreotype, for example, then that's actually useful information for somebody who's accessing the alt text. And if it's a purely decorative image, like can't think of a good example right now, but if it's not being used as kind of like content to convey information, you do not need to put alt text. So you can leave it as like a null field, like just leave it blank or put like empty quotation marks, so that the screen reader will just pass over it. And I will also say that alt text should not be confused with image captions, which serve a very different purpose and are not actually descriptive of what the content of the image is. So you may be tempted to put like artist, like I work in an art museum, so you might want to put like artist, title of the work, year, medium, that sort of thing. That's not actually useful information in terms of alt text. And you may also have like different types of images, like more informative, decorative, functional, and then also images of text. So if you have images of text, include the text in your alt text, so that people can understand that. There's links that'll kind of like help you figure out how to write good alt text for a variety of different images. So you may need to do a bit of research on that sort of thing. And then finally, we have attachments and links. And oh, I forgot that I put this in. Sorry, Natalie. This was just a beautiful example of kind of like a more poetic example of an image description that was included in the alt text section on Twitter for NASA and their recent images that were taken by the James Webb Telescope. Beautiful, beautiful structure. So I'll quickly read it if that's okay. The image is divided horizontally by an undulating line between a cloudscape forming a nebula along the bottom portion and a comparatively clear upper portion. Speckled across both portions is a star field, showing innumerable stars of many sizes. The smallest of these are small, distant, and faint points of light. The largest of these appear larger, closer, brighter, and more fully resolved with 8-point diffraction spikes. The upper portion of the image is bluish and has a wispy, translucent cloud-like streaks rising from the nebula below. The orangish, cloudy formation in the bottom half varies in density and ranges from translucent to opaque. The stars vary in color, the majority of which have a blue or orange hue. The cloud-like structure of the nebula contains ridges, peaks, and valleys, an appearance very similar to a mountain range. 3 long diffraction spikes from the top edge of the image suggest the presence of a larger star just out of view. So you can see that actually captures the whole spirit of the image, and I haven't seen alt text like this in a very long time. It's just, yeah, beautiful.
Thank you for that example. That was very nice. In terms of attachments and links, this is kind of the last portion of our checklist. So some things that you can do to ensure that your attachments and links are more accessible. The first would be to ensure that any documents that you're linking to, so PDFs or other file formats, are also following accessibility standards. So in terms of page structure, headings, things like that, you want to ensure that that's reflected in your documents as well. In terms of links, this is something that I've definitely seen a lot, which is applying links to phrases like here or see more. Those are not good because if someone, for example, is accessing your content using a screen reader and they want to just jump to all of the different links on the page, if they're all using the text click here, they're not going to be able to necessarily differentiate where that is linking them to if they're all the same. So instead, you want to apply links to keywords that support and make sense in the context, out of context, rather, so that they support the task and they aren't just kind of generically click here or find out more, things like that. So you want to really think about where you're applying your links to. As well, you'll want to avoid linking to full URLs in your text. It's just generally more difficult to read. And then the last tip we have is adding the words pic, audio, video, PDF after links, so that especially users accessing the content using a screen reader are going to know where that link is taking them to, basically. And then another thing we have as a tip is just testing out your documents once they're uploaded to ensure that any accessibility kind of modifications or coding that you've made in those documents hasn't been stripped out once they've been uploaded to your website. So I think that does conclude the presentation portion of the session. So I want to thank everyone for being here today. I think we'll go into some questions now, and I'll hand things back over to Megan. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Natalie and Danuta. That was amazing, and definitely going to be taking a look at our own website and our own digital content and doing a good review of those. So I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen so that I could see the chat and everything. So yeah, we'll open it up to questions, comments. Just feel free to unmute your mic. Or as I said before, pop them in the chat if you have any questions. All right, not seeing any questions yet.
Everybody just absorbing all of that. I know it was a lot, real fast.
A lot of information.
And it's only like scratching the surface too.
Natalie, I'm not sure if you wanted to do, I know I'm just seeing on your slide, you had like the exercises. If folks wanted to take a go at that, maybe like the alt text practice, like to just to try and put to use some of those great tips that we just learned. I can reshare the screen.
Yeah, definitely.
And there we go.
And then if you want to
Natalie
just go to
had
the
it.
next slide.
Yeah, I think Natalie had like a good image too.
Yeah, so Danuta went over some best practices for writing alt text. So again, just to quickly kind of go over that before you practice with this image. So you want to write out your alt text in plain language. You'll want to format it fairly short. So Danuta gave the example of like a tweet. You want to definitely consider the context. So I'll give you the context for this image in just a moment. You'll want to avoid using phrases like image of, picture of, photo of, things like that. And then just generally focus on describing what can be seen in the image. And depends on the context, but sometimes interpretation is appropriate. In other cases, you maybe want to avoid that and just kind of stick to more describing what you can see. So this is an image from the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum. It's from one of their online exhibitions, I believe. And this image is accompanied by a poem. So that's kind of the context for this image. If you would like specifics about what are some of the buildings, maybe that are pictured here, feel free to let me know in the chat. But again, just really focus on describing what you see very kind of succinctly, about the length of a tweet, 1 to 2 sentences. And yeah, I think we'll give you maybe about 5 minutes, and then we can share in the chat.
And Sammy says, yes, would love to know what the buildings are.
Okay, so this is a photo. This is a photo taken of a landscape in Elmont. And the building that you're seeing, the main kind of like blocky building on the left is, I believe, the old flour mill. And so that's all I'll give, I think, for context for now. And then in terms of context for the image, I'll just put the sentence that kind of accompanies this on the Mississippi Valley Textile Museum website. So a selection of poems paired with photography inspired by Mississippi Valley's industrial history and landscape. And once you're done, feel free to just pop your alt text in the chat if you'd like. All right, so I'm seeing an example in the chat. Sammy, did you want to read your alt text that you came up with?
Sure. So I put the old flour mill, just adding a little bit of context, which is a white building with 3 stories, overlooks a river in early evening. The building and the sunset are reflected in the water in the river. That's what I put, just to keep it as simple and catchy as possible.
Nice. Yeah, I really like this. It's really succinct. It's 2 sentences. You've described that we're seeing a sunset, that we're also seeing a landscape, and kind of the main kind of landmark that we're also seeing tied to kind of the heritage of the Mississippi Valley. All right, Danuta, so do you want to read yours?
Sure. So I wrote a riverscape at sunset featuring a flour mill, a white brick 3-story building, and a darkened tree line. The sky is fiery yellow and orange, partially obscured by a blue-purple wisp of cloud. 2/3 of the image is taken up by water and reflections on the surface. So I went for the more vibe of it all.
Very nice example. I like the kind of emotional description of the sky, fiery orange, and then wisp of cloud. I like that a lot. Does anyone else want to share? Did we want to show the color contrast checker?
Did you have that open?
I thought it was a plugin. I don't have it open.
Yeah, I think I have that on my work computer, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
Oh my God, cat, hi. Just elbowed my cat in the face by accident. Oh dear.
Well, I guess we could also pop some links in the chat for that browser extension for the contrast checker and some of the other resources. Did you want to do that?
Yeah, I just popped that browser extension. So if you're using Google Chrome, for example, there are a number of browser extensions that you can get in the Google Store that are free to use. That can help you to kind of check your websites for accessibility criteria. And this is one that Natalie and I found while we were putting this presentation together, and it seems really useful because you can look at your website as if you were a person with color blindness, in addition to checking the color contrast of like your text, your different elements of your page layout. So that you can address them as you move forwards. So it's just a little button that kind of like gets tacked on to your browser, and when you click it, it does the evaluation. I found it very useful, and I'm probably going to use it in my own work moving forward. Did you want to add anything, Natalie?
Yeah, so earlier I mentioned the Hemingway app. So this is a tool you can use to test the readability of content on your website. So I'll just pop that link into the chat as well. And I'm wondering if there's other links we want to include. Did anyone have any particular like questions or like of more resources they'd like links to?
I was just gonna say another option, as long as it's all right with Natalie and Danuta, is we could share the PowerPoint, because I know that you included some different tools and those links in there, so we can share that PowerPoint with everyone. So then they have them all in one nice little package, because I know we're just coming to the end of our time, and I know a couple of folks have had to leave after their maybe their lunch hour or something, but yeah, I'll just open it up one last time for any questions, but maybe we'll just start wrapping it up, and we'll send a follow-up email with all of these things, so with the presentation, and we're gonna ask all you lovely folks to fill out a survey for us, and other information. But yeah, any last minute questions? But I really enjoyed everybody's alt text, especially that NASA alt text is just beautiful. It's just so great.
That is how you do it.
Yeah, this person understood the assignment.
Yes. Yeah, I love alt text so much. The more I learn about it, the more interesting it is, especially like because it's so subjective. If you're describing something for somebody, like even just the way, like that exercise that Natalie had us do, everybody approaches things a little bit differently. It's just wildly so fascinating to me.
Yeah, and I think if folks like think about it in that way, like there's no, I mean, I assume because you're saying it's so subjective, there's no perfect way to describe something, right? So as long as you're doing your best and maybe take a little joy in doing it like that, like giving the vibe and having fun with it, it's less of something to check off your checklist and more of something
it's more human
job,
like person to person, rather than like, oh, this is the thing that I have to check off, exactly like you were just saying, Megan.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. Well, thank you, Danuta and Natalie, so much. This was wonderful. We will, this was recorded, so we'll be popping this onto our YouTube channel as well, and sharing that with everyone so you can revisit it, and share it with anyone you think might have use of it. So thank you, everyone. We'll be following up with an email, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you for being here.